Alright, so I got an interesting one today. We're going to be taking a look at the Ancient King. This is the monster that Tatsumaki fights at the beginning of episode 10. So I'm going to be explaining this guy and figuring out how powerful he was as well. But we're also going to be taking a deeper look at his lore and mythology and how it relates to the lore and mythology of the One Punch Man world. Now, granted, this guy is exclusive to the anime. He does not appear in the manga, so his canon is extremely debatable and the impact that it has on the actual overall story of the series. But I do think this guy was more or less created by one, as well as his lore. And I'll go more into why I think that is later. So let's get into it. So allegedly this guy existed over 300 million years ago. And he put himself into like this cryogenic hibernation because he was waiting for the opportune time to wake up again when the Deep Sea King and the Subterranean Kings were gone. So he says, now I can reclaim the surface since they are gone, which might be giving us some insight into they made him go into hibernation. Maybe they just overpowered him, maybe they worked together, or maybe just the force they represented forced him to retreat for some reason. And that could be giving us some insight into how powerful this guy was. But also it's looking at the mythology, like I said, because if this guy did exist over 300 million years ago, then that means the Deep Sea King and the Subterranean King did. And I certainly didn't think those guys were that old. So maybe it's like a lineage thing. Maybe the Deep Sea King and the Subterranean Kings that we see in this series aren't necessarily 300 years old, but the hierarchy and, like I said, the lineage of the Sea Folk and the Subterraneans go back that far. And I'm sure we can also group the Sky King into this little group here of, like, the original rulers of the Earth, like the Deep Sea King was the Sea King, the Subterranean King was the underground, Sky King was the sky, and then this guy, the Ancient King, was the surface ruler. But more so, he says that he was the ruler of the dinosaurs who ruled the Earth around that time back in the day. But he also says they're called the Terror Lizard Clan. So is that like what the dinosaurs consider themselves to be? Like maybe we just call them dinosaurs, but they think that they're terror lizards. And maybe in this world, they're kind of like monsters, kind of like the Sea Folk and the Subterraneans are. They're not like necessarily like lizards the way that we see them in our own reality. But this is all also giving us some insight into monsters or just things of that nature. It's like they always have kind of been a part of this world, and they actually predate humans. I mean, if the evolution in this reality is similar to our own. But this also lines up with what Dr. Genius said about the Sea Folk. He says that they were monsters from the beginning, and they're like natural enemies to intelligent humans. So that's pretty interesting. I guess that means that maybe dinosaurs in that world were kind of like the Sea Folk and that they are monsters. And going more so into the past, we do see that mural of the Subterranean King in Chapter 99, which kind of indicates that, it was old, and the whole Monster Association underground base, that was implied to be created by the Subterraneans. So maybe that's like hundreds of millions of years old, and that mural we're looking at is just as old as well. But we also see like Elder Centipede, or what we can assume is Elder Centipede in that mural, like around the Subterranean King. So that might mean that Elder Centipede is hundreds of millions of years old too, along with like the other centipede type monsters, or just monsters of that nature in general. So now let's get into how powerful this guy could have been. So in an interview, one said that Deep Sea King, Sky King, and Subterranean King are all around the same level, and that's like demon. So it's debatable how strong Deep Sea King is in the water, and I talk about this in a video that I recently made on my channel, where he's probably like dragon level in the water, considering how powerful he is in his dry form, and how powerful he becomes when he's just hydrated from the rain. But the Sky King seems to be typical demon level, as well as like the Subterranean King, although it's really difficult to say how powerful he is. In reality, considering he has no feats, and he kind of looks comical compared to his dream version that we see take on Saitama. But the Ancient King specifically says the Deep Sea and the Subterranean King. So maybe the Subterranean King and the Deep Sea King together were enough to force this guy to go into hibernation, or it was one or the other. But either way, they are still around to this day, obviously, and the Ancient King is not. So I think this could mean that this guy is probably demon level if he can't take the Deep Sea King or the Subterranean Kings by himself. But it kind of seems like he could. I'm just taking a guess. I mean, he's easily the biggest of all of the kings we've seen so far, by a large margin. This guy's like close in size, if not bigger than like Orochi. But he seems to like lack speed. That's one of like his least defining features that I've seen so far. Like when he tries to step on Tatsumaki, it's like very slow, like even slower than someone much bigger than him in like Beefcake, so that's kind of holding him back. So I'm sure Deep Sea King is way faster. I mean, it goes without saying, way faster than him. I'm sure Subterranean King might be, and then the Sky King, it doesn't really matter. But he does have some good durability. Like, he eats missiles, no problem. Now, it's really debatable if the Deep Sea King and the Subterranean King could tank those missiles as well, because we don't really get to see them do anything like that. But the missiles don't even really affect him at all. Like, he doesn't even flinch or anything. They kind of just, explode, and then he just keeps walking. So that's pretty impressive, and definitely indicative of at least demon level. But is it possible that just his size alone is pushing him to, dragon level? Well, not always necessarily the case. Like, when we look at, huge monsters that can, destroy buildings and whatnot pretty easily, like 100 Eyes Octopus, he's just regulated to be a demon. So maybe this guy, despite being very big, might just still be at that demon level and not quite a dragon. So as for what seems to be his most impressive ability, he has some kind of, fire breath or fire blast or something. We don't get to see what it becomes, but we can assume that he just shoots like a projectile or something. We can actually kind of compare it to the Sky King, because the Sky King we see shoot like a fire projectile out of his mouth, and that's pretty powerful. Like, we see the impact that it makes on the Hero Association, and it's kind of big. Also, if you're comparing the scope of that and the size of the Hero Association to other buildings in the vicinity, it appears that Sky King's blast could probably nuke a building, no problem. So at the minimum, it seems like the Ancient King's blast is on that level, but considering that he is much bigger than the Sky King, and his blast is much bigger than the Sky King's blast, we can assume that that thing can wipe out a couple buildings, no problem. So that's pretty powerful. That could be close to dragon level, but all of his other qualities could be holding him back from really achieving that level. And also his fear, or what is implied to be fear of the Subterranean and Deep Sea Kings, probably is showing us that he's definitely not dragon level. I mean, also, it's said that, Darkshine could just touch Deep Sea King and he'd explode. And if the Subterranean King is on the level or close to Deep Sea King, I'm sure that the same thing would happen to him. And then we saw what happened to the Sky King. Actually, all of the Sky people, they got low diffed by Melzergard, who is a definitive dragon, mid-dragon level. So, all in all, thinking that this guy probably is a high demon at best. I mean, he's not a weakling or anything. I'm sure that he could give Puri Puri Prisoner and Sonic and guys on that level difficulty the same way that Deep Sea King did. In his own way, presenting size and his projectiles and stuff like that, rather than the skill and speed and precision that Deep Sea King brings to the table. But also, let's go into his eventual death by Tatsumaki. So, of course, Tatsumaki's above dragon. It's no question that she could take care of somebody like that. She could even take care of dragons, no problem, as we've seen. But the meteor that Tatsumaki pulls from space to destroy this dude, apparently things weren't supposed to go down that way. This was kind of a mistake by the animation team. So, apparently, they misinterpreted one's intentions when animating that fight, and one only wanted Tatsumaki to drop a big boulder on the Ancient King. And before the boulder hits him, the Ancient King has a flashback of the meteor that destroyed his race eons ago and starts to scream. She wasn't supposed to pull a meteor from space. It was only supposed to be a flashback, but if she could do that, it would make her way more powerful than what she is, because allegedly she would have been able to bring down Boros' ship just with the pull of her Esper powers. Without difficulty, if she could pull that meteor from space. At least according to Murata, who we know is probably hearing this from One. But this is also making me think that One probably did create the Ancient King and the mythology behind him, so it's kind of like pseudo-canon, and the mythology in 300 million years ago and how he relates to the other kings may or may not be true. I mean, also, Shingo Natsume, the director of Season 1, he goes on in an interview and says that, One helped them, with the struggling creation process that they had in writing and everything. So I think that kind of supplements it in a way, more or less. I mean, it's really up for you to decide. But I think that he probably did have a large part in making this character. But also, the meteor that may or may not have happened wiped away his race, but kind of left him by himself. So maybe this is why he went into hibernation. Maybe that's why he was worried about the Deep Sea King and the Subterranean King. Maybe he just felt by himself he couldn't take them all down. So maybe that's less into how weak he was, or maybe it's how powerful he was. I don't know. It's say, but I do think that he's probably like high demon level. But it is interesting that they specifically chose Tatsumaki to take this guy down. So that could be pushing him to dragon level, but he just doesn't really seem like he could be that. other than his size and the implications of what his fire blast could do. But that's pretty much it for the video today, guys. Let me know what you thought about this one. I hope you thought it was interesting. I thought it was. But if you liked it, please give it a like. And I also have a Patreon. Gives you access to a weekly Q&A. And if you haven't already, please subscribe as well. Have a great day.